Welcome to the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium's Accessibility Review Training Module. The Smarter Balanced Assessment System will use a variety of items and tasks to collect evidence about student development of the Common Core State Standards and college and career readiness. These items will range from brief selected response items that target specific concepts and skills to more elaborate constructed response items and performance tasks that require the application of English language arts and mathematics concepts to complex real-world scenarios. This module focuses on several topics that members of the Accessibility Review Committee should be familiar with prior to examining the accessibility of the items and tasks that have been developed for the Smarter Balanced Assessment System. Specifically, this module describes the purpose of accessibility review, provides an overview of the structure and organization of the Item Review Committee and the expectations of committee members, introduces the several documents that were developed to provide guidelines for the development and review of accessible items and tasks, revisits the concept of accessibility in the context of assessment, and identifies several issues that should be considered when examining the accessibility of items during the review process. Let's begin with an overview of the purpose of accessibility review. The quality of an item or performance task is dependent on whether it is able to elicit appropriate evidence of student learning. When factors other than the knowledge, skill, or ability that is the target of assessment influences a student's performance on an item, this impacts the quality of the evidence of student learning. As was introduced in the module on universal design, there are many factors that can affect the ability of an item or performance task to elicit accurate evidence about the knowledge, skill, or ability developed by each student. Collectively, these factors fall under the broad category of accessibility. The purpose of accessibility review is to identify any issues that may negatively affect a student's ability to access an item or task, or the item and task's ability to elicit valid evidence from students about an assessment target. There are several key expectations Smarter Balanced has established for review committee members. First, members are expected to apply the information contained in this module when reviewing items, tasks, and stimulus materials. They must work collaboratively with other committee members and be willing to listen to and respect the views of fellow committee members. It is important for committee members to hold high expectations for the quality of items, tasks, and stimulus materials, and to provide honest and constructive feedback for each item, task, or stimuli reviewed. When reviewing the quality of items, members' focus should be on the accessibility of the item, task, or stimuli. Know that other review committees will focus on other aspects, such as content, bias, and sensitivity. As is explained in detail next, accessibility reviewers should consider whether aspects of the item may negatively affect the item or task's ability to elicit evidence that accurately reflects the knowledge and skills that are the target of assessment for all students or for a subgroup of students with a given access need. To perform this role, committee members must be familiar with and understand the information contained in several documents developed by Smarter Balanced to inform the development and review of accessible items and tasks. The accessibility guidelines developed by Smarter Balanced are organized into several documents. The most important for informing accessibility review is the General Accessibility Guidelines. These guidelines will be explored in greater detail in this module. For now, know that they provide guidance on several of the key issues that can negatively affect the accessibility of items and tasks. Accessibility challenges that are specific to students who are developing English language skills are explored in greater detail in the Guidelines for Accessibility for English Language Learners. Detailed information about the presentation of items and tasks in tactile form are provided in the Tactile Accessibility Guidelines. The Signing Guidelines provide information that is specific to presentation of items and tasks in American Sign Language. And the Mathematics and English Language Arts Audio Guidelines provide detailed information on how to present items and tasks in a spoken or read-aloud form. Collectively, these documents provide a comprehensive description of the accessibility issues to consider and guidelines to follow when developing and reviewing items and tasks. The General Accessibility Guidelines, however, is the document accessibility reviewers will most frequently consult. Smarter Balanced invested several months considering accessibility and developed a document called General Accessibility Guidelines. This document contains a wealth of information about accessible assessments, including a detailed description of accessibility and assessment, an overview of universal design, a description of accessibility extensions, requirements for accessible test delivery interfaces, and guidelines for developing accessible assessments. Following the completion of this module, Accessibility Review Committee members are expected to read the General Accessibility Guidelines. In this module, we will examine 3 characteristics that are discussed in detail throughout the guideline documents and that can affect the accessibility of items and tasks. These categories include language, visual elements, and design. As we explored in the Universal Design module, content contained in an item or task that may be sensitive to some students or which creates bias for subgroups of students can also impact the accessibility of the item. Bias and sensitivity, however, will be examined in greater detail in a separate module. Before examining characteristics of items that influence accessibility, it is important to revisit how an item is designed to function. As was discussed in the Universal Design module, items and tasks are designed to perform several functions. First, items and tasks present information to a student in order to activate the knowledge, skill, or ability that is the target of assessment. The information presented to students may include stimulus materials like a reading passage, figure, graph, sound file, movie clip, or an animation. In addition, a prompt is used to establish the problem the student is expected to work on and respond to. Second, an item or task provides students an opportunity to apply their knowledge, skill, or ability as they work on the problem presented. Third, an item or task provides one or more ways for students to record their thinking in the form of a response. Students' responses serve as a tangible, visible product of their application of the targeted knowledge, skill, or ability. Responses are then scored, and scores for items and tasks are then used to make an inference about the extent to which the student has developed the knowledge, skill, or abilities that are the target of assessment. As was also discussed in the Universal Design module, there are at least 3 primary barriers that impact the accessibility of an item. First, if the information presented by the item or task to the student is not accurately accessed by the student, the item or task may not appropriately activate the knowledge, skill, or ability that is the target of assessment. Similarly, if the student has difficulty interacting with the item or task due to factors unrelated to the knowledge, skill, or ability that is the target of assessment, the item may fail to elicit accurate evidence about it. And if the response produced by the student does not accurately capture or reflect their thinking, the item or task may misrepresent the extent to which the student has developed the knowledge, skill, or ability that is the target of assessment. The extent to which each of these barriers may influence the accessibility of an item should be considered during item and task review. Smarter Balanced has thought carefully about potential challenges that the use of language can have on the ability of an item to elicit evidence about an assessment target. Language challenges can occur for a variety of reasons, including students only recently being exposed to and learning English, lack of familiarity with terms, phrases, or contexts that are used to establish a problem, or misunderstanding the meaning of text due to overly complex or poorly constructed phrasing. To help minimize these challenges, several guidelines specific to language have been developed. There are a large number of language guidelines provided in the General Accessibility Guidelines. Here, the focus is on key issues and questions to consider during accessibility review. To ensure students understand what is being asked of them, directions and item stems should always use simple, clear, and easy-to-understand language. Items that contain confusing language or which do not set the problem in a manner that is easy to understand should be identified as creating a potential accessibility issue. Excess verbiage should be avoided so that prompts and stimuli are the minimum length required to establish the problem or to provide information with which the student is expected to work. Excess length can increase cognitive processing demands and can create fatigue for some students. Sentences that contain multiple clauses often increase cognitive processing and create confusion for some students. If a sentence can be broken into multiple sentences, or if unnecessary clauses are identified, the item should be identified as creating a potential accessibility. To help students understand directions and prompts, items should use vocabulary and sentence structure for prompts and directions that is at grade level when assessing reading skills. When assessing skills other than reading, vocabulary and sentence structure that is at or below grade level should be used. Items that contain ambiguous words, idioms, or jargon can be confusing for students who are developing language proficiency and can create bias for students who are unfamiliar with such terms. Items that contain such vocabulary and could be rewritten to eliminate the use of such terms should be flagged for potential accessibility issues. False cognates are words that have a common origin but which have a different meaning. As an example, the word billion represents the number billion in English but represents the number trillion in Spanish. False cognates should be avoided when possible to limit confusion for English language learners. The English Language Learner Accessibility Guidelines provide more details and examples of false cognates. Words that are unusual, names of people and places that are unusual, and contexts that are likely to be unfamiliar to some students can create confusion and distract students from the task presented by the item or task. Wording prompts negatively can cause confusion for some students, particularly those that are still developing English language proficiency. Terms like not and never should be carefully considered to determine whether they are needed or whether the prompt can be reworded to avoid their use. Additional considerations regarding the language use are detailed in the General Accessibility Guidelines, and reviewers should be familiar with each consideration. For students who have vision needs or who have challenges processing large amounts of information, visual elements such as graphics, video clips, and interactive tools can present challenges. When reviewing items and tasks for potential accessibility concerns, the following considerations have been established by the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. Many items include visual elements that are not essential for responding to the prompt. Visual elements should only be used when absolutely necessary to activate the knowledge or skill being measured or to present information with which the student must work to produce a response. Visual elements are often translated into tactile form for students who are blind or have very low vision. The more complex an image is, the more difficult it often is to produce a tactile version that accurately reflects the original image and which is accessible. Visual elements must be as simple as possible. Students with vision needs may not be able to see everything displayed on the screen or on paper. To cue students that a visual element is associated with an item, prompts should refer directly to visual elements. To aid viewing of visual elements, they must be presented clearly and with sufficient contrast. Using grayscale with fine distinctions between shades of gray can make it difficult for students with vision needs to distinguish between objects or sections of a diagram or graph. Color should be avoided unless absolutely necessary. While color may add visual interest for some students, it creates accessibility issues for students with color blindness. All visual elements should contain labels and should have alternate text descriptions associated with them. Labels are useful for allowing students with moderate vision needs to understand what is being displayed in a visual element. Alternate text descriptions are essential for allowing students who are blind or have very low vision to access the concepts and information conveyed by a visual element. Like the use of color, the use of multimedia and interactive tools can make items and tasks more interesting and engaging, but they can be difficult for students with vision, auditory, and/or fine and gross motor skills to access. The use of multimedia and interactive tools should be limited to assessment targets for which they are essential to either present information, apply the skill being measured, or to capture a student response. Additional information about these and other issues specific to visual elements can be found in the General Accessibility Guidelines and in the Tactile Guidelines. A large number of design issues are described in detail in the Smarter Balanced Style Guide. Much of the information presented in the style guide is intended to create a consistent display and presentation of information across items and tasks. A subset of the topics explored in the style guide, however, have important accessibility implications and are the focus of the design guidelines. Among these issues are displaying all content required for an item or task on a single page or screen. Presenting information in multiple places increases cognitive load and can lead to some students not realizing that additional information is presented. While some items and tasks contain more information than can be contained on a single page or screen, such content should be divided carefully so that information is grouped logically. When information presented in a stimulus cannot fit on a single screen, it should be presented as separate pages rather than in a scroll box. Presenting information in separate pages rather than as a scroll makes it easier for students to remember where information was located in text and to find it when necessary. Presenting information as separate pages rather than a scroll also makes it easier for students to identify how much information is presented and decreases opportunities to miss information displayed in a continuous scroll. All visual elements should be referred to in the text of the prompt and should be displayed in close proximity to that text. This practice simplifies the process of finding the visual elements and for comparing what is stated in the text about the element with the element itself. Crowding multiple pieces of information together can make it difficult for some students to process that information. While there is a balance between spreading information across multiple pages and crowding information on one page, reviewers must use their judgment to determine when crowding outweighs the potential negative effects that result from displaying content across multiple pages. All visual elements should contain labels and should have alternate text descriptions associated with them. Labels are useful for allowing students with moderate vision needs to understand what is being displayed in a visual element. Alternate text descriptions are essential for allowing students who are blind or have very low vision access the concepts and information conveyed by a visual element. When reviewing items and tasks, it is important to remember that some students will access content using text-to-speech tools. To support text-to-speech access, labels should use letters, numbers, or symbols that are easy to pronounce and are not easily confused with each other. As an example, the letter S and X appear very different, but sound very similar when spoken. Conversely, the letters O and Q sound very different when spoken, but appear similar when written. Several factors can make a table unnecessarily complex. Tables can contain more information than is needed for the problem presented to the student. Tables can be formatted with merged cells that can be difficult for a text-to-speech or an assistive communication device to navigate. Tables can also be structured with more rows or columns than is necessary. Tables should always be designed to be simple to read and should only contain information that is necessary for the task at hand. Items and tasks that require students to engage with multimedia elements at the same time can present challenges for students with vision, hearing, or information processing needs. As an example, listening to a speech about a piece of artwork or watching a video that references data displayed in a table can present accessibility challenges for some students. Students who have hearing needs must be provided with text-based captions or descriptions of speech presented in a video, animation, or audio file. Additional information about design guidelines can be found in the General Accessibility Guidelines and in the Tactile Guidelines. Smarter Balanced is committed to developing items and tasks that are maximally accessible for all students. For some content presented in items and tasks, accessibility extensions will be required. An accessibility extension allows content associated with an item or task to be presented in a different form. As an example, text-based content might be presented in an audio form for students with vision needs or who have difficulty decoding text. Or text-based information might be presented in Braille for students who are blind and read Braille. While Accessibility Review Committee members are not expected to have a deep understanding of all accessibility extensions provided by Smarter Balanced, a few key considerations should guide accessibility review. Among the issues to consider are the feasibility of presenting content in a spoken form. Symbols, long sequences of numbers or letters, and unusual words may present challenges when read aloud. Complex graphics or graphics that make fine distinctions between elements, such as sections within a pie chart, can be challenging to present in a tactile form. Jargon, idioms, and unusual names of objects often do not translate well into other languages and can be difficult to present in American Sign Language. Again, accessibility reviewers may not have a deep knowledge of the full range of issues associated with preparing accessibility extensions, but any content that may appear to present a challenge should be identified. This module presented several important issues Accessibility Review Committee members should consider when reviewing items and tasks. Among these considerations are the extent to which vocabulary, sentence structure, readability, and complexity of text may present accessibility challenges for some students, the extent to which visual elements are required, and if so, whether they are designed to be easy to access, the extent to which the layout and design of items and tasks makes them easy to navigate and access all the information required to work on the problem posed, the extent to which content can be accurately presented in other forms, including tactile, audio, or translated into another language. This module also introduced reviewers to the several documents Smarter Balanced has developed to help guide the development and review of items to ensure they are as accessible as possible for all students. Considering each of these issues will help review committee members identify items, tasks, and stimulus material that do not meet the standards for accessibility established by the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium.